when we get a person classified as mentally ill, we put him through a degradation ceremony. He is deprived of civil rights, and because he's crazy, anything he says will ipso facto be wrong and evidence of craziness. If he doesn't like this and starts to get obstreperous, then further restrictions are put on him. He is put in a solitary way. Eventually he's trying to communicate, he's trying to say something, and he feels mistrustful of himself because everybody around him doubts him. Finally he's reduced to being put naked in a padded cell where all he has to express himself with is excrement. And we say, isn't that typical of the sad case that the fellow's in? But it's brought about by the circumstances. It's not the individual. It's the individual in a certain context. A context of total mistrust, all around. A clinical psychologist at Atascadero State Hospital was saying to me not so long ago, he said, people always ask about a given person, is he violent? And a person isn't violent in the same way quite that a flower has 5 petals. He is violent in a certain context. And in that context, yes, violence will flare up. Is he a good husband? Maybe he is, but it also depends a bit on who he's married to. It always takes 2 to make a quarrel. So if instead, you see, of the degradation ceremony and saying you are sick, immediately there's an encounter, a psychiatric encounter. The person is a patient, and that means there's something wrong with him. It used to be called wicked, you see, but now it's called sick. But supposing we worked another way, supposing, for the sake of argument, we thought of a person who is experiencing life in an unusual way as growing in some direction, but disturbed only because of the resistance of the social environment to this kind of growth. And then we got this person into an institution where instead of going through a degradation ceremony, he would go through an initiation ceremony. And be made perfectly clear that something special was happening, and the community is here to help him get through it and advance it and explore it. Maybe this is a religious crisis of some kind, spiritual crisis. But the trouble again is, you see, that in so many cases, whenever a patient in a mental hospital produces religious communications, then they know he's nuts. Especially if it has anything to do with Oriental religions or weird things like that. I remember a case of a young man in the Air Force who attended a school where I was teaching, and he got deeply involved into Oriental philosophy, and he had a classical awakening experience. But it was mighty strong stuff for him. But he was in the Air Force and he went AWOL. He couldn't care less about going through all these procedures and so on. And his entire job in the Air Force was some stupid thing. He wasn't connected with a plane. He never saw a plane. It was some kind of checking in and out at a desk somewhere. Well, we couldn't handle him because he was the property of the Air Force. And the men in the white coats came along and they took him to hospital. And when he started talking about having studied Oriental philosophy, they just said, oh, no, come now. And they put him away. Finally, he was returned to his family, and they put him into an institution where he had 2 years of shock treatment, and finally escaped and returned to the world as a very creative member of society, now engaged in a very important work. Well, there's a hypothesis. But you see how subversive it is. It simply turns things upside down so far as we're ordinarily concerned. It's sane. Sane people are mostly crazy. And crazy people are in certain cases on their way to becoming sane. But you see what an inversion that is. Go back, however, in time, and you see that when the Buddha organized the Sangha, they were all dropouts. And they adopted as their standard costume the yellow robe worn by convicts. And said, well, we feel that the cosmology in which you people believe you're living in, that's the order of society and the order of the world, is pure agony, dukkha. You're trying to solve unreal and illusory problems. You think that by acquiring what you think is security, what you think is happiness, is merely a way of tormenting yourself. And if you're sane at all, you'll stop doing it. You'll drop out. Do you realize Buddhism in its initial form, as far as one can tell, is a critique of the notion that survival is the supreme good. It's never been proved that it's good to survive. There's really a choice whether you want to end up with a bang or a whimper. Some people would say it is good when something burns at a slow rate for a long time. That's good. Other people would say, no, that's boring. We want an enormous flash. And that'll be that. Who's right? That's why lots of people love to do dangerous things. They feel more intensely alive than people who play it careful. So I'm merely putting these suggestions out simply as a way of indicating that the realm of religious inquiry, the realm of investigating our basic assumptions, is a very dangerous adventure. Therefore, many people who carry on these things learn the art of protective coloring. And it is called esotericism. The reason for the esoteric, for a cautious attitude, for not telling everything, only to the initiate sort of thing, is that if the world at large found out what those people were really doing, it would have the screaming memes. And you have to do the same thing. But do it consciously. That means cultivating at the same time as you carry on such inquiries great academic respectability. It's immensely important to have people going around in white coats, to have, when you do any practical investigations into religion, have plenty of scientific instruments. By all means get a computer, whether you use it or not. Because these are magical objects which will protect you in the same way as hex signs. Always be able to speak the right language. See, that's the trouble. When a person has schizophrenia, he gets into difficulty. His difficulty is he can't talk the right language. A person who is what you might call a successful and adaptive mystic knows how to talk to people in their everyday language. And he doesn't startle them, except in, say, in Zen circles. Now, why is it when you study Zen that all these dialogues sound so funny? They sound absolutely nutty. Well, Zen masters did not, as a rule, carry on that sort of conversation with people who weren't studying Zen. When you meet these people, they are perfectly ordinary, able to handle the world in a very competent way and relate to anyone. And it's only in the protected environment of the Zen school that there are occasions under which anything goes, and you are expected to react to a certain situation without stopping to think. You see, what you're doing, just to illustrate this sort of process, you're learning to trust your own brain. And people who have only learned to think verbally don't trust their brains. You say, wait a minute, I have time to think that out, which means arrange a word order or a number order. That's thinking it out. But one of the great difficulties of life is that there isn't time to think things out, except very trivial things where an immediate decision is not important. How does one make decisions? Well, you gather a lot of evidence and facts and a lot of advice, and then you add it all up and you think, well, we can knock out this possibility and this possibility, we won't do that. We come down to two things we might do. And the evidence on both sides is that either might be all right and either might be terribly wrong. Let's flip a coin. We do that all the time because in any human situation there are always infinitely many non-measurable variables which may upset the best laid plans. You never know. You sign the contract and you rely on this firm and so on, but you don't know the president's not going to slip on a banana skin or have an automobile accident. There's no way of figuring that out. So you flip coins. The Chinese invented a 64-sided coin for flipping, called the Book of Changes. I sometimes think it has more possibility than a merely two-sided coin. So, the point is here, we do have in the human brain an extraordinary computer which can work at terrific speed and come up with some awfully sensible things, because after all, it is this brain that regulates the whole homeostasis of the human body, which is an astounding organization. And the thing that really proves how clever our brains are is that our best neurologists can't understand them. So you obviously got to trust your own brain, because if you can't trust your own brain, there's nothing you can trust. So a lot of these experiments that are being done are experiments in brain trusting, in learning to act spontaneously and make instant decisions without hesitation. It's for this reason that Zen got connected with the practice of judo. Because in judo, you've got to act before you think. Because if you stop to think, it's too late. And judo is not merely building in reflexes. Because you can only build in a certain number of reflexes, and then you wait for an enemy to attack you in a way for which you haven't learned a reflex, and then you're in trouble. It is actually, as it were, cultivating a kind of complex perception and intelligence which we don't ordinarily exercise in a culture which overvalues thinking. That is to say, negotiating life primarily with the aids of words, numbers, and similar symbols. Now, I can put this another way, and you will see in this sort of thing, any of you with any psychological or scientific training will immediately see possibilities for experiments. The thing that seems to have happened in the development of language is that we've learned to identify ourselves, our ego, with a peculiar and restricted use of perception or conscious attention. When we were little children and we were in classroom, and we were goofing off and looking all over the place and picking our noses and throwing spitballs at people, the teacher would slam the desk and say, "Pay attention!" And all the kids know exactly what to do. They wrap their legs around the leg of the chair and stare at the teacher. Because then they look as if they're paying attention. Actually, they're not. They're thinking about paying attention, but they're not necessarily listening to the lesson. How do you force yourself to listen? Because that's a distraction from listening. In order to concentrate, you've got to trust your mind. You've got to let go and let the information come in. I mean, if you want to remember, you've got to simply assume that you will remember instead of hammering the phrases into your head. Assume that you've got a memory. Trust it. So what has happened is something like this, as far as I can see. We've specialized in a form of awareness and attention which is rather like the scanning process of radar. And we constantly scan our environment. We select those features of the environment that we consider noteworthy, that they have some sort of significance. And for those, we have a notation. See, what is notable has a notation. Make a note of it. So words are designed to pick out those features of the environment. We have names for the things that we think are noteworthy. Like the tailor who went to see the Pope, and they said, what was he like? Oh, he said he was about a size 40. Noteworthy to the tailor. What's important about rabbits? Are they cuddly? Good for fur coats? Or for stewed rabbit, you see? It's how whether you're a cook or a furrier or a child looking at the thing. So quite obviously we perceive an enormous number of things that we don't notice. If you're a husband and you go out to some meeting and the lady is there and you go back home and your wife says, was Mrs. So-and-so there? You said, yes, I was talking to her. Well, what was she wearing? You haven't the faintest idea. You saw, but you didn't notice. So, as a result of this, you see, we are using a restricted consciousness. And we say, as a result of using that, you can only think of one thing at a time. Well, one thing at a time is too slow. Most people cannot deal with more than 3 variables without using a pencil. You learn something more than that when you start playing the organ, and you've got 2 keyboards, and you've got different rhythms going for each hand and another rhythm going for each foot. See, you're beginning to loosen up a bit then. You are becoming unrigid. But there are all sorts of critical things happening all the time, on which we have to decide so suddenly that there's no time to think in the ordinary way. But many people are somehow peculiarly gifted at acting intelligently under such circumstances. Because you're more intelligent than you think. So this sort of inquiry means, when I say a scientific approach to non-verbal intelligence, non-symbolic intelligence. That's what's called, that's the whole point in Buddhistic, Taoistic, and a great deal of Hindu practice, is called the state of jhana, which is the attitude of observing the environment, both the interior environment of the organism and the external environment of nature, without thinking about it. Now, ordinarily, you see, this sounds like stupidity. But it's only by thinking that I can say, I'm different from you. A baby knows you're no more different from me than my head is different from my feet. Well, sure, the feet is different from the head because it's all one body, but the body polarizes itself in different aspects. But my experience of you is the state of my nervous system. I know you by digesting you neurologically. You know me the same way. It's mutual. So the separateness of things is conceptual. And it's necessary to suspend concepts. This is very important academically, because you can get to the point where a library is nothing but a self-breeding concept machine, in which books are about books are about books are about books are about books. It's sort of disintegrating like a great cheese. It has mitosis. And so these poor PhD students are grubbing around, writing volumes about other volumes, and they're making condensations of it. See, this is one of the great problems in information theory. In certain fields of science, so much information is coming out that nobody could possibly read it. And so you have to make digests. And that means later digests of digests. And then where are we going to store the stuff? Well, we've got to have microfilms and new kinds of miniaturization of data. Call it capta rather than data. But what about it? Well, the difficulty in that is not only it's becoming unmanageable, and again the difficulty of thought coping with something that requires speed, but also that it's slowly moving away from reality. By reality, I mean what we call the physical world. And consequently, it's exactly the same situation as if I never stop talking. If I do that, you see, I never hear what anybody else has to say. Now, it's the same problem for a person who never stops thinking. He never has anything to think about except thinking. You've got to start thinking.